So how do you think Moses makes his coffee? Well, he brews it. Welcome back to the Trans and Christian Journey Through Scripture, everybody. I am so excited to be back here with you this week. We are talking about Exodus, the second book in the Bible. As you probably remember from last week's video, in Genesis, God promises three things to the people of Israel: land, family, and blessing. In this second book, those promises start taking shape, but there are some definite complications along the way. Just like with Genesis, we can split Exodus up into a couple of different parts. We're going to split it up into three different parts today. The first one is the part we're going to be talking most about, and that runs from chapter 1 to chapter 18, and it's the story of the enslavement and then liberation of the people of Israel. Part 2, from chapter 19 to chapter 31, talks about the covenant that God makes with the people of Israel at Mount Sinai. And the last section, part 3, runs from chapter 32 to chapter 40, the last chapter, and it gives us a sense of the new relationship between God and Israel. So, liberation, covenant, new relationship. We're going to start at the beginning with the very familiar story of Moses. So when we left off last week, Joseph had brought his family to Egypt to weather this big famine that was taking place in the whole land. At the beginning of Exodus, generations have passed, and the people of Israel have multiplied, and there are many more of them now, and there's a new Pharaoh on the throne who doesn't remember the story of Joseph. This new Pharaoh begins to get nervous because he sees that the Israelite or the Hebrew people could theoretically rise up and overthrow the government. So, of course, the response to that from the people in power is to enslave the people they're afraid of. Pharaoh also speaks to the two head midwives of the Hebrew people. Their names are Shiphrah and Puah, and we are not sure, because of some tricky prepositions, whether these midwives were Hebrew themselves or whether they were Egyptian midwives to the Hebrew women. In either case, Pharaoh talks to these two women and commands them to kill every baby boy that they deliver. But we're told that these midwives fear God, which in the language of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible means that they know the God of Israel, and so they refuse to do what the Pharaoh commands. Now, can we just take a minute to recognize the badassery of the writers of Exodus who do not give Pharaoh, the man in power, a name? We never know who this Pharaoh is. He's just Pharaoh. But we do know the names of two midwives who defied Pharaoh and said, no, I'm not going to do this. They stood up and they said, no, this is unjust and I won't do it. We know the names of these two midwives, and they are in our history forever now. So on that note, United States citizens, take note. Call your senators, get them to support Senate Bill 3036, which is the Keep Families Together bill. Please call your senators. It means a lot right now. So we're told that God blesses Shiphrah and Puah for doing this, and God blesses them and protects their families. Still, though, Pharaoh is intent on crushing the Israelites, and so he ends up commanding that the Egyptians throw every baby boy born into the Nile to drown. One woman named Yocheved takes her baby that is like the prettiest baby she's ever seen, and she tries to protect him by putting him in a basket of reeds and setting him afloat on the Nile. Pharaoh's daughter comes down to the river to bathe, and she sees this basket and sees the baby and immediately falls in love with him and takes him up and names him Moses. Now, Moses' sister, Miriam, has been watching this whole thing from a ways away. She's probably like 5 years-ish older than Moses. And she goes up to Pharaoh's daughter and says, hey, would you like a nurse to take care of this baby? Pharaoh says yes, and so Miriam goes and gets their mother, Yocheved, and brings her back, and she is able to take care of Moses until he's grown up. Now, last week, I teased this book by saying that Exodus is one of the most important books in Black theology, and part of the reason for that is obvious for white folks and for non-Black people of color, but other reasons are not. So let's talk about them. We get that the Israelites were slaves in Egypt, much like African and African-American people were enslaved in the United States, but there are more connections that go almost to like a visceral level. So check out what womanist scholar and Reverend Will Gaffney says about this. Will Gaffney has a book called Womanist Midrash. It's amazing. I highly recommend it. She's talking about Yocheved, Moses' mother, Moses and Miriam's mother, and she says, Yocheved became an agent of resistance. The very decision to give birth was an act of defiance. Yocheved's experience trying to maintain family unity as a slave woman, albeit one with a benevolent mistress, is comparable to the experiences of enslaved African women in the American South, regularly separated from spouses and children, even if they labored on the same plantations. When enslaved Black women read the story of Yocheved, they saw their experience mirrored back to them, sometimes the experiences of having your own children ripped from you and then having to take care of the children of white folks. They could see themselves in Scripture, which means, one, they were not suffering alone, and two, that they had a hope for liberation, just like the Israelite people experienced liberation. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. Back in this story, we're not to liberation yet. So Moses grows up in this in-between world where he knows that he's a Hebrew by birth, but he grows up in the Egyptian court. So he's kind of in this in-between space. One day he's out walking and he sees an Egyptian slave driver hurting a Hebrew man, and he can't take it anymore, and he ends up murdering this Egyptian and hiding the body. Eventually, people find out, and so Moses flees from Egypt. He goes out into the wilderness of Midian. He eventually meets his wife, Zipporah, and spends time living out with his family-in-law. Then one day, he's out caring for his sheep, and he stumbles into a burning bush. He goes over to the bush to see what the heck's going on, and he hears God speaking to him out of this bush. In chapter 3, God says, "I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their sufferings, and I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians." Moses tries every excuse in the book to try to get God to pick somebody else, but God's not having it. God says, "Moses, you're the one to go." Although God does make the concession and says, "Your brother Aaron can help." So Moses goes back to Egypt and tells Pharaoh that the Israelites must be allowed to leave to go worship God, and Pharaoh is not having any of it. God sends 10 plagues on Egypt to try to get Pharaoh to change his mind, and every time Pharaoh looks like he's going to change, and then at the last minute is like, nope, never mind. I think it's important to note that after plague number 7, which is thunder and hail, Moses says, "Let my people go," and Pharaoh says, "I will let your men go, but your women and children must stay here." And Moses says, "No way, not happening. We're not going unless we're all going." That part of the story really resonates with me when I think about our LGBTQ community, because we're not free until we're all free. Finally, after the worst plague comes, Pharaoh relents and says, "Okay, your people may go," and the Israelites book it out of there so fast they don't even have time to let their bread rise, which is why Jewish people still eat unleavened bread on Passover. God leads the people to the edge of the Red Sea, which is also known as the Reed Sea, and the Israelites are like right there at the edge of the sea when all of a sudden Pharaoh says, "You know what? No, I'm going to send my army after them and get rid of them once and for all." And so the Egyptian army is coming behind them, and the Hebrews are stuck in front of this sea that they can't get through, and they don't know what to do. But God enables Moses to part the sea, and the people walk through on dry land, and then when the Egyptian army tries to come through after them, the waters close and drown them all. So that's kind of a disturbing poetic justice that originally the Egyptians wanted to drown the Hebrews, and then the Egyptians get drowned in the end. So there you go. Now it's here on the other side of the Red Sea that I want to introduce you to Miriam, our Queero of the Week. Miriam is not canonically queer, although she never marries, which is strange for a woman in this time and place. But she's our queero because she messes with gender boundaries and what was allowed for women at the time. She's the first woman in the Bible who is ever referred to as a prophet, and she essentially leads the people of Israel with Moses and Aaron. She takes this leadership role that no other women have up until this point, and so she sort of bends the gender boundaries and the gender expectations when it comes to who's allowed to lead. So the Israelites get to the other side of the Red Sea, and they're saved, and it's great, but they almost immediately start complaining about how there's no food and there's no water, which is understandable, but kind of frustrating for Moses and the gang. God keeps providing what the people need, and eventually they make it to this big mountain, Mount Sinai. This is where the second part of Exodus starts, and I'm going to blast through it real quickly. Moses goes up to Mount Sinai to meet with God, and God gives him the 10 Commandments that most of us are familiar with. But God also gives Moses laws about how to treat slaves, how to deal with violence, how to compensate for lost property, and various social and religious laws. Some of these laws we see as sort of awful and irrelevant now, such as the one about how exactly a man should go about selling his daughter into slavery, which is not great. Others are really pertinent, like one in chapter 22 that says, "You shall not wrong or oppress a resident alien, for you were once aliens in the land of Egypt." Part 3, the last part of Exodus, starts in chapter 32 when the Israelite people get restless. They realize that Moses has been gone up on this mountain for a really long time, 40 days to be exact, and they start going, "Hey, is he ever going to come back?" The Israelites turn to Aaron and they say, "Hey, we don't know what's going on anymore. Please build us a god to give us some kind of leader. You can be our new leader now." Aaron takes all the jewelry from the people that they had brought out of Egypt, melts it down, and creates this golden calf, this golden baby cow as a statue. He then says, "This is the God that brought you out of Egypt," and the people worship it. Now, this sounds weird, right? Like, why would the Israelites want or believe that this statue is God? Why? Well, theologians have come up with a lot of different reasons for this, but the one that I like most comes out of a Jewish tradition that says that the people wanted a God that they could control. They had seen some incredibly scary things from the God of Israel at this point. They had seen plagues, they had seen columns of fire, they'd seen the Red Sea part, they had been told that if they touched Mount Sinai, they would drop down dead. That's scary stuff. And maybe they'd kind of gotten used to the gods of Egypt who just were statues and sat there, and that the Pharaoh trotted out whenever he wanted an excuse to do some public policy. Maybe the people of Israel just wanted a religious pawn that they could use for their own political power, something that they could control. Sounds a lot safer than a relationship with the unpredictable God of the universe. But for whatever reason, God sees what's going on down at the foot of Mount Sinai and says to Moses, "Hey, your people are down there worshiping a golden calf. What the heck is going on?" For a minute, God considers wiping out the people completely and starting over again with just Moses, like God did with Noah and the flood, but Moses eventually convinces God not to. God relents. Moses goes down Mount Sinai with these big tablets, these big stone tablets with the law written all over them, and Moses gets down to the bottom of the mountain, and he sees what's going on, and he gets so angry and so upset that he smashes the tablets on the ground. And this is when Moses gets a little bit scary. He burns the golden calf down to dust, mixes it with water, and makes the Israelites drink it. Then he commands everybody who's still loyal to God to come join him over here, and a large group does, and then he tells that group to murder everybody else, including their own family members. Finally, Moses goes back up the mountain to God and offers himself in exchange and said, "God, if you will forgive the people, you can kill me instead," essentially. God says, "That's not necessary, I'm not going to kill you," but God does send a plague on the people. So this is where I'm introducing a new segment called Ask an Expert, because we need some help with this one. The question I'm asking this week is, why is Moses so bloodthirsty, and why is God so vengeful? What is going on here? This is a terrible story, right? The Israelites freak out and start worshiping another god, and then Moses freaks out, and God freaks out, and over 3,000 people are killed, and then they get a disease sent on them, and it's just terrible. So for an answer, I'm turning to biblical scholar Walter Brueggemann, who specializes in Old Testament theology, and in fact, we're looking at his book called Theology of the Old Testament. Brueggemann points out that the Israelite people had just been released from captivity in Egypt, a place where they were either killed as children, worked to death, or executed for disobedience. So when God delivers them from slavery, and essentially the people start to think of God as their new ruler, maybe they were expecting the same kind of leadership. Even though Brueggemann says God is not a sovereign like Pharaoh, and the new command society of Sinai is one of dignity, freedom, and well-being, the people are still acting out of their trauma. Maybe Moses was expecting God to be this terrible, vengeful being, and maybe the people were expecting this too, and their expectations got rolled up into how they saw God acting and how they recorded these stories. In the end, though, God helps Moses rewrite these big tablets with all of the law on them, including instructions for how to build a tabernacle, the place where God is going to live, the sort of sanctuary where God will stay among the Israelite people. The Israelites create this building according to these new laws and codes, and God begins to live among the Israelites as they begin their journey toward a new home. So, why is this book and set of stories important for LGBT Christians? Well, many people describe Exodus as the story of a people who are freed from something for something. The Israelites are liberated by a God who hears their cries for help and liberates them, and then gives them a whole bunch of rules about how to love their neighbor, how to protect their neighbor and even their neighbor's cattle, and how to execute justice in their land. The Israelites aren't just freed to go about living however they want, they're freed for a purpose, to make the world a better place and to uphold justice. I think that's something LGBTQ plus folks need to hear today. That, like, if you are in a place where you are oppressed and you're being beaten down, God hears your cries, just like God hears the cries of the slaves in Egypt, right? God hears those cries, and God is working for your liberation. God is with you and on your side. But we also need to remember that once we are liberated, once we do feel free again, we are called to then liberate others. We have to remember to act like the midwives in Egypt who said no to injustice. We have to remember to act like Moses, who said that he would not leave any single person left behind. As people of God, we join others as liberated people who then go and liberate others. And what better time to celebrate our liberation than during Pride Month? Happy Pride Month, everybody. So, what does this liberation mean for you today? That's the question I'm going to leave you with this week. Thanks so much to the supporters over at Patreon, and special shout outs to Debbie and Lauren and Lisa, who are all new supporters. You are making these videos happen. If you want to keep these videos going and get to really cool stories like Ruth and Deborah and David and Samuel and all of these amazing people in the Bible, I need your help and I need your support because these videos take a lot more research than the old ones did. So head over to the Patreon. There's a link below if you want to check that out. Tune back in next Wednesday to hear about the dreaded stories in Leviticus. That's right, the ones with all the prohibitions about gay stuff. That's what we're talking about next week. So come back next Wednesday and I will see you back here. And until then, keep reading, everybody.